Hello, my name is Andrew, and now my analysis will be on the Kaitei Kyoku Sekai Ishu Sugoroku. And this Sugoroku actually is called Home Education Around the World. Now, by observing the visual aspects of Sugoroku is a geographical map, however, not geographically accurate as with a normal map. However, it still depicts a map in general of the major landmarks and characters that are seen throughout the board, which initially represents international cities. As an example, you can see right here on the far right is the pyramids of Egypt, and on the far south is the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. And as you also notice on the border of the Sudoku are different flags of the different countries that are initially within the map of the Sudoku. Now, consisting of these visuals also include number arrows that goes from different points throughout the map, with each point marking a city initially. The color scheme of the map, however, is what you can see is in past illustrations, a map within Japan's medieval time, essentially during the Edo period, as well as the periods before that, which essentially is mimicking a Nihonga, which means it's a traditional Japanese map. While of course adding some of the modern aesthetics to it. While I managed to understand the rules of the game found at the very bottom of the Sudoku is actually quite complex for first-time players, considering that the procedures they must follow has a sequence to it. So, for example, the instructions state that each game starts with 2 points, where you could either start, or actually no, initially starts in 2 points on two majors on two specific cities. And the instructions also include that those specific cities you will start with depend on the number that you use, the number you're assigned. So normally in a regular Sudoku, you will use a Japanese dice, and essentially with those dice, whatever the number lands on is how when you start. Now, the instructions state that you will begin either in the city of Tokyo or Osaka, with Tokyo representing odd numbers, 1, 3, and 5. While with Osaka is actually even numbers, so 2, 4, and 6. And depending on the number that the dice lands on is where you would start. And after you begin with the game, the instructors also state that you'll be able to take certain routes depending on your start position. And as you can notice, if I zoom into the Sudoku here, you can actually notice there is aligned numbers that goes along with the arrows. So initially, if you were to start, somewhere, let's for example at the point here, whatever the dice that you land on. So for example, if you land on 1, you move up 1, and if you land on, let's say, 2, you will take the route that's associated with the number, and so on until you reach the end point, which initially means the end of the game where you initially win. Now, judging by the red arrows with a number connected to them, we can actually tell them that the player will definitely go through major cities or checkpoints, as I would like to call it, as the game is trying to get the player to understand the different cities and cultures associated with the country. And as like I mentioned before, within the visual aspects, you can see examples of those. Now, the time when this Sudoku was published was in 1926. Was during the end of the Taisho era, where Emperor Showa, actually the Showa era began, and this initially embarked the state administration to move on to more radical ideologies such as nationalism, because they felt that due to the effects of the First World War and the Great Depression, that as well as the first Sino-Japanese War, where they managed to occupy Korea. That they will essentially like move on to more independent colonial campaign. And what is also interesting is that as the state moves on to that, Japanese people begin to believe in the propaganda that the state provides. However, during the time that this was published, although still gives the opportunity for Japanese children and young adults themselves to actually learn about the cultures in different cities of the world without having to leave their home. Now, those who are also brave enough to embark on an actual journey to those cities, they may learn more. But this initially, Sugoroku is meant for entertainment and for educational purposes. Other than that, I hope you enjoy this presentation.
The Sugoroku that I analyzed for this project were all produced in the first 4 decades of the 20th century and all share very common themes. Nationalism, imperialism, and militarism were illustrated throughout all of the Sugoroku boards that I analyzed, and they were used as tools to instill a favorable view of the Japanese war efforts in children and teenagers and young adults. The Sugoroku that I analyzed portrayed the Japanese war efforts in the first Sino-Japanese War at the end of the 19th century, the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, and finally the exploits of the Japanese imperial forces in Asia and the Pacific during the 1920s and 1930s. Of the Meiji Restoration in the mid-1800s to the dawn of World War II, the Japanese military made tremendous efforts to keep up with the great powers of the West and put their army to use in all of these aforementioned conflicts. However, military technology and new tactics that the Japanese learned from the West were just a part of their success in battle. What the Japanese needed the most was a population of men that bowed to the military cause. This is what I found to be the most interesting aspect of the Sugoroku project and of the Sugorokus in general was what their target audience was. You can tell that they were designed for children, for teenagers, for young adults, all to grow up feeling that that the military was, to be supported, to be revered by all means. And it made me understand the psyche of the Japanese soldier in World War II, their never surrender attitude, the kamikaze efforts at the end of the war, and just the valiant efforts that they displayed throughout all these military conflicts. If you instill, if you grow up playing these games that are, that they depict the military, the army, the Navy as such integral parts of what it means to be a Japanese man, it just will result in having such a devotion from these men, which was something that one could really admire, and that one can, as from the perspective of man, you can admire their courage. But unfortunately, this sort of brainwashing, this sort of like adoration of the military that was instilled through Sugorokus resulted in millions of dead civilians, in the rapes of millions of women in World War II, and then finally the dropping of 2 atomic bombs in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as the Americans saw that it was a requirement to end the war. I thoroughly enjoyed analyzing the Sugoroku. I thought it was a great project, and I am happy that the class included this kind of a project, as it was very unique, and it was something that I enjoyed doing quite a lot.
Hello, my name is Jaron Brown, and I'm part of the Heian Group, and this is part of the presentation for our group project. The 3 Sugoroku board games that I chose were all pretty much different. First, I would like to say that I found the board games to be quite interesting. Obviously, we don't speak any Chinese or Japanese, so it was kind of a little tough kind of reading the boards. And based on the clues that I've gotten for the 3 boards, I basically, and what I know from doing the class and doing some research, I was able to piece together some things. And hopefully I was accurate in the things that I put together. Nonetheless, it's kind of fun. And I'm going to share with you guys what I have for these game boards. So the first one that I want to talk about is it was the Sugoroku board that pertained to the young boys going off to war. It was made in 1919, and just given that time frame, it was basically just after World War One had finished, and the board game had a lot of war pictures, I would say. A lot of the clues there that that gave a time frame was the clothes that was worn by the soldiers. Gave a really good time frame as to what was going on. Also, the types of weapons that they had, the guns, definitely gave a time frame for those, what the time frame was during the time when they made that game. The colors that were used on the board, I had to get into my real artistic side of things, and they used a lot of bright colors, a lot of vibrant colors like red, especially with the war going on. A lot of the red and yellow that were in there that kind of brought the board game to life, made the game look very intense. As a guy, it would look like something that I would be interested in playing. I don't know if you guys remember the board games back in the day. We used to play a game called Risk. It was one of my favorite board games. Another one was Stratego. They were war games and kind of gave a war vibe with the colors that they used on there. Let's see here. The board game basically was made up of 22 spaces, this specific board game. And there was a box in the lower right corner that, to what I made the inference was that the words on each from the start, because there's a symbol that means start and a symbol that means finish. And where the start symbol was, and it started, there were different prints that could have or may not, but from what I made my inference from, pertain to that box that was in the lower right-hand corner. And I believe as you move to each space, that box would basically dictate where you would go on that block as far as moving forward and how you get to the end. Obviously, on all these Sugoroku board games, I believe first one to get to the end wins. That would seem to be pretty straightforward. The last person that gets to the end of the board or to the part where it says finish won. The educational message for this one, I believe, is basically like the life of a soldier, and what they go through. Starting off from a young boy, and we got to remember that these Sugoroku boards were also used as propaganda. And like I said, I attribute the board game to World War One. At the end, it seemed like there was a big celebration on the board game, the last spot, and the way that World War One ended seemed to kind of fit that notion based on the pictures that were there. It showed the triumphs and the failures of the young man going through the war, and that's what I attributed that first board to. I did was entitled "Development of National Prosperity." This one was a little bit different, and it kind of reminisced a lot of the things that we did, we learned about in our class as far as the restoration of Japan and how they moved to modernity and westernization as they built and got more advanced. And as you look at the board on this one, it seemed to mimic that very same sentiment. Was associated, the date associated made that I put that was associated with the board was 1931. And 1931 was, if I'm not mistaken, was a tough time around that time because that's when that was around the time of the Great Depression. So I know the world was feeling the lash of the Great Depression as they most economies weren't doing too well right at that point. And I believe the board was set up to show them the growth of Japan and what they were able to do during those times. Again, these will be put into the newspapers. So I believe that the people would look at these games and they would get encouragement from it. They would get be enlightened by these games. It was also something very fun for them to do. So as they're reading the newspapers and maybe getting, bad news on what's going on, you play these games and you see that they were able to do these great things in the past and got themselves to a point where they were on top of the world, and maybe they can get there again. A lot of the clues on here were the clothes again. That would be for all the boards. You can see what they wore to get a kind of time frame of where they were. And around when these boards were made. Let's see here. The colors on this specific board game was very subtle. It had a really, really Asian or Japanese culture type of vibe going on with the colors they had. They had a picture there which looked like it was the Imperial Palace. It also started to progress to where they brought in trains. And then from the trains, they showed telephone poles, which would be indicative of, technology and the push forward. And each picture seemed to go forward with more and more technology and growth as the game progressed. Oddly enough, this specific board game did have something that had to do with dice in each one of the pictures. So the mechanism of movement on here, I would suggest that, or I would make the inference that maybe you would need a pair of dice to play this specific game. And that would dictate what you rolled, would dictate how you would move along the board, kind of like our traditional board game that you would use a dice with. That Sugoroku board was actually my favorite one of all the ones that I chose to do. And I know we're supposed to make inferences, so I'm inferring that that's what that was all about. I don't know, could I be wrong? But I feel strongly on what I felt like I gathered from the last Sugoroku board that I did. Was a really fun one, pretty short, and same type of deal where you had a progressive board with pictures that depict something. This specific one had to do with little kids. And this one didn't so much progress with different pictures of different people, like some of the other ones did. These were the same two children in every one of the pictures, and they kind of suggest that they were doing something for a duration of time, whether that be for a couple of months or whatnot, or however that duration of time would be. It would just be them doing something. But you can tell in each picture that they were doing something different at a different place at a different time. But that's the way it progressed. But the thing that they were doing was acts of kindness. And I came to that conclusion because in each picture, they were helping someone, whether they were doing their chores, they were cleaning something up. There was a picture as it progressed, so they were helping a lady cross the street. Each picture seemed to progress with them doing something of kindness. And the pictures, the last where the winning spot, which was the last spot on the board, ended with the two kids asleep and Santa Claus bringing them gifts. So the meaning behind this specific Sugoroku board, I think, might have came. I was in 1920. All right, so that's the date that was associated with this game board. And again, some of the clues on there would be clothes that was worn. That gave great insight to the time frame. Saw a lady washing clothes, and the method of washing clothes also gave another insight to the time frame of when this could have been done. The colors were red, of course, and green, festive season. That's what I gathered from the red and the green. And then, of course, seeing Santa Claus at the end, that was just the icing on the cake for me to just make that determination that this was something that was done for the holiday season. And the consistent progression of acts of kindness led me to believe that the educational or the basis behind this specific Sugoroku board was was if you are naughty, Santa won't bring you anything. But if you're good, if you do these things like do your chores and help the elderly, and you do nice things throughout the year, then you are rewarded. Santa will bring you what you want. And that was symbolized by the finished block being the two kids asleep on bed and Santa Claus with gifts in his hands, basically for the kids. This one seemed to be kind of an easier read than the rest of them. Based on what you were seeing, you didn't really need much more detail, in my opinion, based on the pictures. And it was a pretty fun one to do, and I'm sure that those guys had a lot of fun back then doing these, playing this one, especially if it was something that was done around Christmas time for the kids. And it also kind of boosts morale, that the kids would go out and do the right things, and be good kids. Because, Santa doesn't bring good things to kids that are naughty, right? So that's the end of my presentation. And I hope that I did well on that. All right, thank you. And you guys have a good evening, morning, or night, whichever time of the day it is. Be blessed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Porto, and I'm part of the Heian Group. I'm here to talk to you today about my third Sugoroku. Part A. This game was made in 1942 and was created during the prime years of World War II. The clues that are given throughout this Sugoroku have pictures with warplanes, military officers, and railroad transportation, which indicate the times of war. The main colors are yellow and red, along with a multitude of other colors. This board is trying to get the attention of the Japanese people in order to take part in the war in any way they can. The image in the middle of the page with the two kids is the biggest of the board itself. It's a reflection of what the soldiers are fighting for in this war for years to come. The game is meant for the people of Japan to fulfill their role by helping the Japanese military and the defense of Japan as best as they can. The game begins with the picture that has the number 1 on it and finishes with the picture that has number 12. This board game is done in chronological order, which then leads to the kids saying goodbye to the soldiers in the middle of the page. Part B. This game was designed for people all throughout Japan as well as soldiers. It was meant as a sign of unification amongst the people of Japan in order to work together during the war. The end goal of the game is to feel proud of being Japanese, especially during a time of war. It enables the people of Japan to have a sense of honor and pride for their nation. The 2 examples that would help someone of that time win at this game would be to do the best that they can in helping Japan win the war by working certain trades important to the war. And the second thing would be to be there for your family and instill that sense of pride and honor into the next generation. The educational message of this board game is to guide the people of Japan into being one nation and supporting each other during a difficult time. War is difficult to deal with, and families need also the support they can get during these times. The message is for all people of Japan. This message was basically for all people of Japan, and was promoted to help lift their spirits during World War II. To hear news of death every day was agonizing for the people of all nations, even if the Japanese put emphasis into dying on the battlefield versus surrendering. I want to say thank you for everyone hearing this Sugoroku, and good luck to each and every one of you.
Hello, my name is Vanessa. My first Sugoroku board, was made in 1902. We have certain things that tells us that it was made in that era with the clothing they were wearing. A lot of women were still wearing their kimono, yakuta style clothing, and of course the men were a little bit more freer, wearing more westernized pieces. Our main color scheme in this one is like a red, green, and yellow kind of colorish. I think just kind of describe like a more lively time and how everything was. I feel like with it being like a train type Sugoroku board, they wanted it to seem more happy and more fun to play and kind of just get around and see Japan and its like modernizations of the time. Our second board is made in 1918, and the tone here changes from a more happier tone to like, I guess, a more playful, serious type of tone. It still seems like it's still directed towards children in this one, but it's more of military. We have kind of like training type areas where people are falling off of, I guess, going out of airplanes and parachuting. We have training for like loud noises, like cannon noises, and we also have like a medic tent, and of course a boy getting a medal at the end. I feel like this one was more leaning towards World War I type of era. Their color scheme is blue, red, and yellow. I feel like this color is more to complement kind of like the British side of everything, and just kind of teach kids that it's how fun war can be, I guess. But it does seem like a little bit more aimed towards children. It does seem a little bit more funner. Even at the end of the board, we have 2 soldiers saluting, or of course the medal one. Third board is made in 1920s, and it's a female-based type board. It kind of goes around with, we begin at the kimono stage, which is the 2 girls at the bottom, and then we go through girls wearing different types of clothing, more fitted for that type of era. The color scheme I really like. This one's one of my favorite boards. It's like a green, red type of scheme, and it seems very simplistic and clean. I really like this board. It looks. And my fourth and final board was made in 1925, and it's a rebuild of Tokyo. This is due to the devastating earthquake back in 1923. They wanted it to be, I guess, to have people, give more people more hope. The colors in this are a little bit more livelier, pink, red, blue, and some green. We have parks, we have like a clothing store. We have people riding bicycles and stuff. So it just seems like a board to give people hope for the future, that they can build their city back up after the earthquake. And those are my boards. Thank you very much.